So, depending on when you're watching this, I will probably still be in the middle of making my big old Drake versus Kendrick video. Sadly, it hit some editing snags and shakeups and real life updates, but I didn't want to let the entire month of June pass without putting out something. So I figured I'd take this opportunity maybe to re-engage with something I've been working on or percolating in the back of my head for years that I actually touched on a bit in the video, which is one Mr. Kanye West, and how he's a super important background character to what eventually happens between Kendrick Lamar and Drake. And no, I'm not talking about that embarrassingly awful diss track that he dropped in the middle of the thing starting to pop off, because he couldn't stand the idea of the biggest moment in rap not centering around him at some point. So yeah, Kanye West has fallen a long way since I first became a fan.
No way I had to get the hooligans up here. We're gonna take this pussy nigga out. Yo, Dot, I got you.
And that's kind of what I want to talk about, because if you've followed Kanye as long as I have, you recognize that his, moment, his emergence as a rap superstar fundamentally changed hip hop as a culture and black culture in general, and of course the industry of rap music. And this paved the way for a Drake to exist, not just sonically, as in all the ways that Drake clearly is influenced by Kanye's sound, but specifically Drake couldn't exist if Kanye had not done what he had did. But again, that comes up in another video. The first half of which I do talk about that is available on my Patreon. And for channel members, if you can't wait another couple of weeks and you want to at least get that first hour and you haven't already, you can check that out there. But if you clicked on this video, it's likely that you already know a lot about Kanye. And if you don't, I made 2 whole videos explaining the rise and fall of Kanye West. And those videos are made in 2022. And sadly, a lot has happened since 2022 to make that fall even deeper. But the key thing to know without watching those whole videos is that Kanye came into the world of hip hop when hip hop was very different. And he had a once in a lifetime run of amazing music and just this amazing persona and vibe around him that made him this ubiquitous megastar in a way that hip hop hadn't really seen between 2001 and 2014. But since 2014, in those last 10 years, he has destroyed his image and legacy in a way that's just as unimaginable as his rise to fame. Kanye went from being that transformative superstar to foaming at the mouth ranting on white supremacist podcasts, talking about how much he loves Adolf Hitler. It's really, really bad. Over the years, fans like myself tried to find ways to explain this change. First, we said, oh, it's because he got with Kim Kardashian, or maybe he has delayed brain injuries from his car crash. We said it was because he lost his mother, because he has bipolar disorder, and different versions of those events surely explain some of his behavior, but not really. It's important to know that Kanye West really, really loved Kim Kardashian, pursued her, and was the driving force behind their relationship, from jump. And bipolar disorder is a severe mental illness, but having bipolar disorder doesn't make you blame black people for slavery. It doesn't make you an asshole. It's just a difficult mental state to be in. And it's important to not think about mental disabilities as excuses for being an asshole or a racist. But I get why we want to do that. We want to make excuses for or explain why Kanye can be so different from the Kanye we met 20 years ago. But I'm here to present the question, what if he's not? You'll hear Kanye fans like myself say, I miss the old Kanye. But I think at this point, we have to start considering that maybe this is the old Kanye. So I'm implying that Kanye has been hiding this type of behavior for a long time and maybe had some of these same opinions way back when we thought he was a much better person. So we have to answer the question as to why he might have been hiding this stuff, or how he could have been getting away with it if he wasn't hiding it as good as we think. And to understand that, we have to do our usual hip hop history lesson. Go ahead, strap in.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge.
As I said earlier, before Kanye, in that 10-year period before he emerges in the early 2000s, hip hop is almost completely dominated by gangster rap, probably starting with Dr. Dre's The Chronic in 1992. Before that point, gangster rap was popular, but so were other forms of hip hop. There was dance and party hip hop, more eclectic stuff, that traditional boom bap, stuff that still sounded like it was from the 70s. There was all kinds of things happening with hip hop, but in the early 90s, gangster rap would pretty much replace all forms of rap music at the highest mainstream levels of the industry. This is not to say that other forms of rap didn't exist. The Roots came out in the mid-90s, Outkast came out in the mid-90s, and so on. But to be a megastar rapper, you had to be hard and from the streets, even if in reality you really weren't, which ironically is low-key true for Dr. Dre himself. So when Kanye was trying to get on in the early 2000s, he was presented with a pretty big barrier to try to be the megastar that he always knew he was in his head. Going back to that Drake reference, Kanye is literally more privileged and further from the traditional hip hop background than Drake is. Kanye is a child of two college-educated college professors and went to some of the best schools in Chicago and existed greatly apart from the more hood areas of Chicago. There's also a lot of speculation that Kanye is neurodiverse, and I don't want to get too far into that, but I will say that Kanye was different and eccentric. You might even say weird, and many of his peers, then and now, will talk about how difficult he sometimes was to be around.
I need a film permit.
He can walk wherever he wants. We can
Not
walk
really.
wherever we want. We can walk wherever we want.
I'm sure he can walk anywhere. I just need to see the
We
permit.
can walk wherever we want. We can walk wherever we want. We can walk
I think I'm
wherever
kidding
we
around.
want.
Keep playing around.
It's also very clear that he has always thought highly of himself. He was always artistically driven by things that weren't as popular with other black people. So there was nowhere for Kanye to really fit in hip hop at the time, at least at the mainstream highest level. Kanye was running around in New York with Rockefeller Records, with former drug dealer turned CEO Jay-Z, former and current street goon Beanie Siegel, Cameron, Freeway, The Diplomats, and Kanye West. But this is actually where things get interesting, and I think we have to start doing some historical reappraisal. Kanye's favorite rapper coming up was Jay-Z. He made 2 whole songs about it, but Kanye's sound was actually more appropriate for another subgenre of hip hop. Conscious hip hop is just as old as any other genre of rap music. In fact, some of the earliest rap music might be considered conscious hip hop, with Grandmaster Flash doing The Message way back in, that had to be like 81, 82. Conscious hip hop isn't easy to define, but I think one of the most sensible ways to describe it is woke, as in the term woke that's been bastardized by white people and Republicans and shit. Woke predates hip hop. It has its origins in black communities, being a term used to discuss how black people should be aware of political realities and discourses. And you can't talk about hip hop without talking about the fact that while hip hop is connected to that disco era and party culture, it's also very closely tied to urban black and brown populations in, say, places like New York and also Detroit, Los Angeles, DC, etc., which means it had a lot of black political traditions and radical thought involved in it. So you had early conscious rap with a very clear pro-black ethos like Public Enemy, Brand Nubian, Boogie Down Production, etc. And that conscious rap was a little different than how we consider it now, because it was much more militant and aggressive. And to a great extent, it didn't look any different than the gangster rap of the era, but due to its militant pro-black energy, it was definitely less desirable for corporate administrators who controlled hip hop to promote it. So over time, you got a lot less J. Rule the Damager and a lot more Drew Down.
Cause a brother is strong and way too long when it comes to my ding dong. But I get.
With gangster rap taking over the airwaves by the mid-90s, conscious rap went through a mutation of sorts. It kind of merged with the underground hip hop scene and the alternative rap scene to become more lyrical and sensitive and thoughtful, while being a little bit less militant. And that was because the sounds became more organic and jazzy, sometimes experimental, because they were open to doing that because they didn't have to appeal to that mainstream audience. Plus, we're starting to get a lot more hip hop from other regions, because you have like the Far Side and the West Coast, and Common Sense coming out of Chicago, and Arrested Development coming out of the South. And that wave continues to be like this really cool like genre within hip hop, but under the mainstream gangster rap umbrella. Why is this important to Kanye? Well, Kanye just fit in better there. his personality, his background, his inability to be convincing as a street rapper, it didn't work there. He found himself being stonewalled by Jay-Z and Dame Dash, who signed him to a record contract, but really weren't interested in putting him in the front to like make his music.
You know, I'm sorry to all the backpack community. You know, due to the fact that I was from the streets, but I never killed anybody, it was just easier for me to pose like a backpacker. But I actually really love street niggas. And I don't really listen to backpack music like that. I listen to Cash Money, Jay-Z, Lil Baby.
Let me just say something.
I pose as a backpacker.
This is something that's documented on the Netflix documentary Genius, which was wild to see because Kanye West is literally walking around the Rockefeller like records offices or whatever, playing songs from College Dropout, playing I think Jesus Walk and All Falls Down, and like some of these amazing songs, and people in the office are looking at him like something's wrong with him. They're looking at him like he's dumb, like he's not being Kanye West in their face in the moment. It really is wild. It makes me kind of understand why Kanye was so incredibly cocky early on in his career. Because they're literally listening to Jesus Walks and then they said, all right, that's cool, but we got to focus on this Memphis Bleak album. This is why Dame Dash hasn't done much for himself since him and Jay-Z broke up. But moving on. So Kanye pivoted and found an audience that was interested in what he was doing and started collaborating to build himself more of a buzz. Specifically, he went on tour with Mos Def and Talib Kweli. Mos Def and Talib were icons of conscious rap at the time. They had started at the group Black Star before releasing classic albums of their own. They weren't as big as Jay-Z, but they were still juggernauts in hip hop and in the space that they occupied. It also didn't hurt that Kanye made beats that were perfect for conscious hip hop. So suddenly Kanye West was a backpacker and things seemed like they were going well. Here's Kanye in this community that he low-key belongs with. The backpackers and the conscious folks are political. Kanye's political. The backpackers and conscious folks are eclectic, and Kanye was eclectic and eccentric. And a lot of the rappers would appreciate the organic and soulful sounds that Kanye West tried to make. And a lot of these guys loved and championed a certain type of black femininity that was earthy and like natural. We got Jill Scott and Erykah Badu and Lauryn Hill. And Kanye, he liked big titty white women. Yeah. It's obvious now that Kanye has a very specific type of woman that he's into, but at the time, you know, he didn't really know. But you can see the change over the years. He started out with his first major girlfriend, Alexis Pfeiffer, and then we just get lighter and lighter to Amber Rose, Kim K, Julia Fox. And now you have to consider that his wife, Beyonce Sensori, is probably exactly the type of woman he's always wanted to be with. And we know this because he said it himself over 10 years ago before he even was dating Kim Kardashian.
I'm not trying to put on. Problem for me is I really like porn and that type of like body style and stuff. But then I'm super like Frenchy fashion guy. I would marry a porn star. I came to that conclusion after going to Brazil. And I would just be like, yo, what? Like I respect Ice-T so much. Wow. Because you know he's having way more fun than anybody else on that red carpet.
And this is further elaborated and confirmed that he was like this way in 2001, 2002 from Talib Kweli when he appeared on the Math Hoffa podcast.
He used to say that on stage at the shows.
Yeah, like
it was like a punchline. He said, I got a white girl on my arm. She's matched with my outfit. And it was funny. But my crowd would boo sometimes. Like they'd be like, boo. You know what I'm saying? But I was like, that shit was funny to me back then. Right. But it was like, I didn't see where it was going to lead.
It was great.
Now, I want to be clear because motherfuckers like take me out of context. I'm not saying that liking white women is a problem or that you can't even be woke or conscious if you like white women. I know Dr. Umar wouldn't agree, but that's my opinion. Still, it's not maybe the best branding strategy for marketing yourself as a conscious rapper, hence Kanye getting booed when he talked about this at the shows. But I guess he couldn't help himself. And it kind of shows the story of Kanye being this originator of conscious hip hop that just changed over time. Another example is in the way that Kanye has always rapped some really cringe bars about sex and women. Like hip hop has, misogyny in it, but Kanye's misogyny is a little different. Recently he came out with a song with some of you new little young niggas, I don't remember who they are. And he says the line in the beginning of his verse, yeah, before I send a bitch a blessing, I need to see if the sex good, I'm a sexist. And I almost want to laugh, but the line is too dumb. It's almost clever because it's so crass. Like I appreciate crass humor and crass hip hop, but the shit doesn't make any sense. And then coming from Kanye in particular, especially with his recent accusations of sexual harassment, these are bars that should not exist. But I bring it up because I'd argue that if this line happened on Dark Fantasy or Late Registration, we probably would have gave it a pass. I talked about this on the B-Sides video a little while back when Vultures 1 dropped. When we still liked Kanye and saw him as a backpacker and heard him saying these horrible bars, we thought it was kind of funny and ironic. And that's because we would also hear him say some real introspective and powerful shit in other songs. So there was more of a balance. Like, even if I'm right and all of this stuff was a front the whole time, it doesn't take away from the fact that Kanye West made some really amazing conscious hip hop in that, 5-10 year period at the beginning of his career. Jesus Walks, All Falls Down, Where the Roses, Homecoming, so on. Kanye knew how to make impactful, conscious hip hop that connected with people. So when he would slip in a bar like, I always had a PhD, a pretty huge dick, that's a real line. We just thought it was funny. We thought, oh, Kanye just wilding, just being silly. But now it's like, no, that was just him being himself. And without the veneer of thinking about him in that specific way, all I can think about is that Life of Pablo line about, models with bleach assholes, and the way that Rhymefest responded to that by basically stop being his friend.
If it's all vanity or all humanity, it don't work. Now, if I this model and she just bleached her ass and I get bleach on my t-shirt and I'm gonna feel like an ass, that's all vanity. That's no humanity. This right here, this was the beginning. And this is when I took an airplane and went home and said, F it. I get out of zero.
Those types of lines have always been there with Kanye. That PhD line is from College Dropout, but we just felt differently about Kanye at the time. And because we felt differently, we didn't clock them. Another thing that we didn't clock, but now the evidence is everywhere, is that Kanye has a long-standing addiction to pornography. This is something I didn't talk about in those old videos because it wasn't out as much back then, but Kanye has recently talked about the fact that he's been addicted to pornography since he was a kid and it's affected him his whole life.
Playboy was my gateway into full-on pornography addiction.
Now, I feel weird talking about this because porn and porn addiction is a complex topic, and I do personally feel that there are legitimate problems with the level of consumption of porn and the level of pornography on social media and how easy it is to get access to it. But there's also this really weird way that people transmute the porn addiction into wanting to police women and just general misogyny and right-wing ideology is just too close to comfort for me. And that's sometimes what Kanye sounds like when he's talking about it, but he's also still talking about mental health and addiction. So I don't have a strong take there, but I will say that if you look through Kanye's career, thinking about him being addicted to porn the whole time, you can kind of see where it pops up. And it's not just those raunchy bars. It's not just him talking about wanting to marry a porn star in 2011. It's in the infamous video for, I think it was called actually Porn Star, off Dark Fantasy, where he had all the nude body doubles. It's the rumors of him putting hardcore pornography on the screen during business meetings. It's that weird song that he did with Lil Pump where he talks about, I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. It just came across as Kanye antics, and that is also another thing that we might have to look at differently. One of Kanye's biggest moments ever, a moment that is still held dear by black people, is him going off script right after Hurricane Katrina to criticize then President Bush.
Build and remain in the area. The destruction of the spirit of the people of southern Louisiana and Mississippi may end up being the most tragic loss of all.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Please call.
In the past few days,
And I don't think like people that weren't there at the time fully understand just how shocking that was. Today, there's a whole economy of black political think piece producers and hot takes and people who are building whole careers in journalism or TikTok or YouTube talking about black issues and issues of racism. So it's normal to hear black people talk about race in 2024. If I say Joe Biden is a racist because of the, 94 crime bill or, supporting a genocide right now, it's not really anything wild for most people to hear. But in 2005, right after what they did to the Dixie Chicks, if you know, like Kanye wasn't Kanye West yet at that point. I don't even think he had dropped his second album. That took a lot of guts, but maybe it didn't for Kanye. Maybe he just is into saying wild shit in public. That may sound like a hot take, but ask yourself, when is the last time after he said that Kanye ever said anything significant or political in service of black people? I can't think of anything. I'm sure he must have said something. But for the most part, ever since that moment, when it comes to black issues, Kanye ain't said shit. There's a comment from one of the older Kanye videos I did that lives rent-free in my head that basically says that the only thing that's true about Kanye as a person is that he's a contrarian. He's almost pathological in needing to go against whatever the ongoing trend or prevailing thought of the time is. And as public sensibilities became more progressive and other celebrities began to speak out for progressive causes, it's like Kanye found himself somehow going with the grain and decided that he had to make sure that he was special and that he was unique and started going against the grain. Does that make sense? Kanye constantly spews out what I call pseudo-intellectual Negro nonsense, or PIN for short. And that's just another way of saying that he's a smart, dumb nigga. Kanye is on record saying he doesn't read. The type of dumb shit he says in public, but it's like, it's wild that a man that has that many strong opinions and so much conviction in his beliefs refuses to actually research the shit he says he believes in. But that's kind of the whole point. To Kanye and people like him, it's not actually about being smart or intelligent or wise or knowledgeable. It's about having the audacity to be loud and opinionated, regardless of the quality of one's opinions. So you think about it like that, you realize reading just gets in the way. It's just much easier to listen to whatever Candace Owens says. And that works because it makes him more abrasive and more contrarian. It's not that Kanye has well-developed or deep-held beliefs about anything important. He just knows the thing to say that will piss people off and bring him attention. And you can see it, like, especially in this last press run, every time Kanye either says some ridiculous ass shit or is about to say some ridiculous ass shit, he gets this goofy ass smile on his face like a little badass kid that knows he's about to say something he's not supposed to say. There's a joy within it for him to be a person saying the thing that you're not supposed to say. And it's the shit is frustrating. And it makes you reconsider what George Bush doesn't care about black people was all about 20 years ago. But even a modern example is his whole thing with anti-Semitism. Much has been made about Kanye's anti-Semitism, and I don't want to downplay it or talk too long about it because it's way more complex than I can give time for right now. I did at one point want to make a whole video about it. I still might at some point in time, but I'm sure you know, if you're watching my channel, that there's a lot going on around the way that certain platforms engage with any type of discussion around Jewish Americans and Judaism in general. And with the stench of Hotep already surrounding me, I'm just going to chill for a little bit. But I do want to point out that Kanye's anti-Semitism is not typical of what anti-Semitism actually looks like in black spaces. Anti-Semitism is something that does exist in black political spaces, but it's built out of a long-standing, complex, and difficult relationship that black people have with Jewish people in America. That's not what Kanye's on. Kanye's not on that Louis Farrakhan shit. He's more on that Nick Fuentes 4chan shit. There's really no black-centered critique of how Jewish Americans and black Americans have had issues with each other coming from Kanye West. It's just, LOL, I made a swastika into the Star of David. Isn't that funny? And if you think about it, that's how a lot of 4chan gripper type people deal with their racism. It's never explicitly about the actual harm being done. It's always this detached irony that this is all just us being funny and edgy. And like, there's a lot of white people watching me, a lot of white boys out there right now in that alt-right phase that started out watching PewDiePie and other people being edgy and funny about race and Jews and shit like that. And I'm not trying to downplay like what that is, but I do think it's important to look at that versus like the current encroachment of Christian fascism going on as slightly different things. They're connected, but they're not the same. And so bringing that back full circle, 20 years ago, when you hear Kanye say that about George Bush, I wonder if that was sincere. Like, how deeply rooted was that in Kanye West to the point where it never came out again, and he's so far on the opposite end of the spectrum at this point. And that moment in particular won him so much goodwill in the eyes of black people, myself included, because that was such a powerful moment. But how long are we going to allow that one moment to hide what Kanye is right now and what he may have even been at the time? It seems to me that it's more likely that that was just another example of him trying to do something that would bring attention to himself. And that brings me to my last piece of evidence about Kanye West's real relationship with black people and black culture. And it's a sobering thing to think about, but I think we have to start to consider that Kanye West has been much more anti-black than we've given him credit for a long time.
That gives him headaches. What, let us know, what was the idea to go somewhere different than you did before?
I mean, just in life, if you like the type of music and you listen to it all the time, you know, why not follow your heart? Why not follow what makes you happy? I remember when the song the movie American Werewolf in Paris came out, and it had the theme song, I think was by Blur. Nothing hurts like your mouth, mouth, mouth. And like me and my friends used to love that song so much. And it was like we weren't supposed to like the song or something because of where we were from.
Like today we know how anti-black Kanye can be. We saw him disrespect Harriet Tubman. We saw him say slavery was a choice, the MAGA hat, white lives matter. Kanye has made a pattern of willfully disrespecting black people again and again. But there's ways that he telegraphed this ideology well before we realized what was happening. I mentioned earlier that Kanye grew up apart from like typical traditional black spaces in Chicago, went to private schools. He even lived in China for a year or so with his mother. And so this isn't exactly the same as living in the suburbs, but it's pretty close to it because his mother sheltered him a lot from what Chicago might have shown him growing up as it pertains to black people. Kanye's experience was different, and certain things tend to happen to black children who grow up a bit too different from their black peers, aka they can get teased and bullied in a very specific and often very harmful way. I refer to this as the fly in the milk experience. It's something that comes up in black social media all the time for those kids who say they talk too white or act black or nobody liked me because I was a black nerd, et cetera, et cetera. And I always feel like the discourse around that is always far too binary. There's so much happening in between where each side of that conversation has legitimate grievances. But specifically for people like Kanye, what happens is that they develop a very strong but also very hard to pin down sense of anti-blackness that makes them see black people as genuinely inferior. It's one of the reasons why I think Kanye gets along with Candace Owens, because she had the exact same experience.
Finish this response. God is good.
God is good. Amen.
No. No.
I thought you were going to say God is great. Thank you for the 48.
God, all right,
Y'all not gonna give it answers?
I'm gonna do you, Charlamagne.
Yes.
Charlamagne, God is good.
All the time.
And all the time?
God is good.
That's right.
Where's that from?
Jesus Christ, Candace.
These folks tend to perceive themselves apart from black culture. They tend to perceive black culture as being inferior and developing certain negative beliefs and attitudes about black people that they're usually learning from the white surroundings that they're immersed in. And so that might not seem like something Kanye did if you weren't paying attention and you weren't there at the time, because I remember vividly the way Kanye talked about college dropout versus late registration. It's during these conversations around these two albums that you start to see that Kanye had a relatively dismissive and negative attitude towards black art and black art traditions, and had a very high opinion of whatever it was that white people were doing. It's not super obvious, but you hear the dog whistles.
Performing at Abbey Road was just, it's one of those type of things when you're dreaming of being a musician or a rapper, you don't even fathom that. And when it's brought up, it's like, oh, wow, we can actually do that. And the fact that I work with John Brown, I work with Tommy and Rosie, and we did a lot of orchestrations, it was a no-brainer for us to work with the strings on it. And I thought it would bring this performance to another level, another class of hip-hop.
Going forward, when you hear him and the late Virgil Abloh say they're going to uplift the taste palette of black culture and urban art and fashion, you're seeing a pattern here. And I'm not saying that this didn't produce amazing music, because it did, but the ways that we often talk about, like Doja Cat and Post Malone, about how they talk about rap music after coming up as rappers, this is kind of how Kanye sounds in these old interviews. Another example of this is coming from that infamous interview with Sway, where he's yelling at him, telling him he doesn't have the answers. A lot of people know that moment just because it was so viral and ridiculous. But what they were arguing about in that interview was Kanye not getting access to the white ran fashion industry in the way he thought he deserved. And Sway was trying to tell him, yo, fuck the white ran fashion industry. We got you here. Black people love what you're doing. Make stuff for us. And Kanye, that wasn't good enough for him. That was really the core of that conflict.
Empower yourself. Yes, but I spent hundreds of thousands and putting out clothing lines at a smaller degree. All I'm asking you,
it ain't no Ralph though. It ain't Ralph level.
Charlemagne the God said something I thought was super insightful about Kanye years ago, maybe before things got really bad, but regardless, it was still relevant. He said that he doesn't know any black man that is more thirsty and needy for the approval of white people. And I can't help but see how that's relevant throughout a lot of Kanye's career. A lot of that was there at the beginning, whether it was jumping on stage with Taylor Swift, the antics at all these award shows, just the try-hard nature of Kanye, and the way they was so eager and like careless with shedding a lot of these black elements to his music. It's there. It's just there. And we didn't notice it because he was so good at playing the role for us. We gave him a lot of grace. I know I'm just maybe speaking for myself there. Shout out to all of you who got off the boat early, but for other Kanye fans, I know I'm not the only one. Those early years was such a revelation, such a high point in like hip hop, black, and just masculinity, black masculinity culture, that you kept hoping and waiting for that guy to show back up when really that guy had done what he was supposed to do. And the guy that we have now is the guy that's been there the whole time. I remember a few years back when Kanye was first taking a crack at gospel music, I got invited to the show he did at New Birth here in Atlanta. It was an interesting experience, and it was still in the middle of maybe Kanye's gonna come out of this. This was after slavery was a choice, but before I tried to kill my baby or whatever he said about Harriet Tubman, before things got worse. At this time, Kanye would still bother to like go show up for black media and apologize and cry and make amends for things he was doing. It still seemed like he wanted to be better than he was. And for most of the year, he would do those Sunday service videos, and it felt like something in him was trying to heal. Like he must have realized just how off his square he was. He was trying to get it together by returning to his faith, maybe by reconnecting to something that he remembers his mother from. It looked a little cult-like. I won't front. The whole Sunday service thing, it gave cult a little bit, but it also gave culture. The vibes were immaculate. Look, he mixed house music with gospel, and whatever thing he did at, I don't know, maybe it was Coachella. That shit was so good. I'm getting goosebumps right now just having the nostalgic auditory connection to how much of a good vibe that was. Maybe that's just because I'm a Chicago Negro, but if you know, you know. So at this particular church service, that was the vibe. And I remember seeing him on stage just kind of wandering around with his head down. And it was tough to watch. I had never seen Kanye in person. That was my first time ever seeing it back in, that must have been 2019. And he looked broken. And he didn't talk much. And when he did talk, it wasn't the most coherent thing. This was also when we were first finding out that he was bipolar. So you couldn't help but sit there and look at this shell of the man he used to be and say, now my man just need help. My man just need help. He just needs support. And like, I was literally in church praying for him to get his shit together. And then after that, you see him running off to the mountains and popping up with, you know, Mos Def and Dave Chappelle and other folks that were his boys and were trying to maybe talk some sense into him. And that was inspiring because I'm not, like, despite the reputation I have, I'm not a cancel culture type of guy. I don't believe in canceling people. Nobody ever actually really gets canceled anyway. Watch my old videos to understand that take. And this is not to say I don't draw certain lines at certain things in certain situations, but I believe that most people's problems are a product of factors that are either in their control or not in their control. And a lot of times, if they're within their control, if they have the support they need to get those things right, then they can get right. And that's what we should always be focused on, even with some of our worst folks. Not the very worst, but some of our folks, black or otherwise, need more than anything to be cocooned and like brought into the fold and worked on more than they need to be made into lolcows. But that's what Kanye made of himself. As you saw Kanye do the White Supremacist podcast tour, did you notice that he only talked to one black person, and it was at the very beginning? And it was Nori on the Drink Champs interview that I've been playing during this video. After he talked to Nori, he didn't talk to no more niggas. We washed our hands of Kanye. It was Fuentes and Alex Jones or Pierce Morgan or whoever else, and that was it. The fact that we washed our hands of Kanye and he hasn't popped up on hardly any black media in 2 years now should tell you something. Black folks have had enough. And I don't think y'all get what it takes for black folks to have enough of a talented black man. There are black folks still riding for R. Kelly, Bill Cosby, and Puffy. We will hold a nigga down well beyond the appropriate expiration date. But Kanye has no niggas on his team. And to me at this point, it's clear that that's more probably for him than for us. That's what he wants. And I think that's the case because he knows that black folks will try to hold him accountable. And that's not what Kanye wants. So I can't help but look at that Drink Champs interview and recognize that while we might miss the old Kanye, the current Kanye definitely does not. That's all I got for this one, y'all. Drake Kendrick video, God willing, right after the 4th, if not earlier, we'll see. Still working on fixing some wrecks that have happened with the video. The joys of being a YouTuber. Please, if you can, support me on Nebula, Patreon, and as a channel member. You can see a near final version of the first hour, yes, first hour of the Drake video. It's over 3 hours long at this point. On my Patreon and as a channel member. Sadly, I cannot put that on Nebula. That's just not how Nebula works. I can't put unfinished stuff there. I understand that frustrates some people. The good thing is, if you're on Nebula, you're going to get it earlier than anyone else anyway. So holla at me then. Thank you so much for your support. Please share the video, all the good stuff, and peace.
I get my